In March 1979, the cooling towers at 3 Mile Island represented the peak of industrial stability. For the operators on the 4 a.m. shift, the facility was a place of deep routine and heavy regulation. When a minor mechanical failure interrupted that routine, operators turned to a specific indicator light on the control panel. The light was dark. According to their manuals, that dark light confirmed a critical cooling valve was safely closed. The valve was actually stuck wide open. This single misunderstanding of a status light triggered the worst nuclear meltdown in American history, destroying half the reactor core in the hours that followed. Nuclear power is the most scrutinized industrial sector on Earth, governed by thousands of pages of procedure and years of simulator training. Yet catastrophic failures continue to find the gap between engineering checklists and human psychology. Rewind the timeline of any major meltdown, and the pattern reveals a series of conscious human choices made long before the emergency alarms ever rang. The emergency at 3 Mile Island started with a simple pump failure in the secondary cooling system. The plant responded as designed, triggering an automatic shutdown of the reactor. To manage the resulting pressure, a relief valve, the PORV, opened. Once the pressure stabilized, it should have retracted. Instead, it jammed mechanically, allowing 1/3 of the reactor's cooling capacity to bleed out of the system. The operators looked at their panel and saw the valve light go dark. However, that light only measured the electrical signal sent to the valve solenoid, not the physical position of the valve itself. The light showed the command, not the reality. Within minutes, the control room was flooded with hundreds of simultaneous unprioritized alarms. This created a state of cognitive overload where distinguishing a critical failure from a minor alert became nearly impossible. Anchoring to the belief that the valve was closed, operators interpreted a rising water level in a separate tank as a sign the system was overfilling. They manually throttled back the emergency cooling pumps, unintentionally accelerating the meltdown of the core. Training drills can prepare a crew for thousands of scripted scenarios, but those drills fail when the instruments themselves provide the data needed to solve the wrong problem. In 1986, reactor number 4 at Chernobyl exploded, releasing 100 radioactive elements directly into the atmosphere and contaminating 150,000 square kilometers of land. The disaster began during a safety test that had been delayed from the day shift to an unbriefed night crew. These operators inherited an unstable reactor, already poisoned by a buildup of xenon gas, which suppressed the core's power far below its safe operating range. The RBMK reactor design contained a hazard called a positive void coefficient. As cooling water turned to steam, the reactor's power output would exponentially increase rather than slow down. When the operators finally triggered an emergency shutdown, they dropped graphite-tipped control rods into a volatile core. Because the graphite increased reactivity before the cooling could take effect, it caused a massive power spike that blew the reactor apart. The Chernobyl operators followed the logic of the data they possessed. Their decisions were the rational endpoint of a system that treated reactor physics as a state secret, denying the crew the information they needed to survive. In March 2011, a 15-meter tsunami wave breached the coastal defenses at Fukushima Daiichi. While the reactors survived the initial earthquake, the flooding reached the basements of the turbine buildings. 11 of the 12 emergency diesel generators were submerged and destroyed, causing a total station blackout that left 3 reactors without any way to cool their fuel. This vulnerability was predicted. In 2009, seismologists provided evidence to TEPCO and regulators that historical tsunamis in the region could easily exceed the plant's seawall height. TEPCO officials acknowledged the risk internally but declined to implement safety upgrades. They feared that admitting a tsunami risk would invite lawsuits, spark anti-nuclear sentiment, and interfere with plant operations. The Fukushima meltdown was locked in years before the Earth ever shook. Institutional silence transformed a manageable natural event into a multi-generational radioactive crisis. Sociologists use a specific framework to understand how these disasters develop, the normalization of deviance. Watch the threshold of risk as it shifts. When an organization repeatedly bypasses a safety rule without suffering a catastrophe, the warning signs are reclassified as acceptable. The TMI valve issues were noted but not corrected. The Chernobyl tests were deferred multiple times. The Fukushima tsunami data was dismissed. The dangerous choice becomes the cultural norm. The result is a total loss of public trust. When 150,000 square kilometers are contaminated, or towns are left uninhabitable for decades, populations realize that safety was sacrificed for institutional expediency. High-quality engineering has saved lives, but engineering alone is insufficient. True safety relies on a culture where the person with the quietest voice who says, "I'm not sure this is safe," carries more weight than the person with the highest authority who says, "Proceed."